Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, a safe place for leading with your heart. Hey, thanks for being here. You, Me, Empathy is the official podcast of the Feely Human Collective, a collaborative mental health community designed to empower each of us to grow our capacity for empathy, vulnerability, and emotional wayfinding. Just a friendly reminder that this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. No one is just a silly boy with a feely heart. You can support the show by leaving a review in Apple Podcasts, following us on social media at Yumi Empathy and Feely Human, and joining the Feely Human Collective community at feelyhuman.co. And now your host, Known Wells.
Hello, Feely Humans. Welcome to another episode of You, Me, Empathy. My name is Known Wells, and this is episode 141 on showing up for others in grief with Alica Forneret. Alica and I, in this episode, talk about why it's okay and critical to take pause, the importance of self-care and inquiry over pushing through our feelings, the empathy and community of the Dead Moms Club, and again, honing our capacity for showing up for others in grief. We talk a lot about grief in this episode. Grief is the thing that Alica talks about a lot. She writes a lot about beautifully on her website, alicaforneret.com. That's ALICAFORNERET.com. And she's wonderful. We had a really lovely conversation. I can't wait for you to check it out. Before we get to the episode, though, I wanted to share some updates and share some reminders. One of which is, so I've been doing EMDR, as you all know, and one of the things that I was thinking about in the last EMDR session was in regards to accepting praise when people praise me or say, hey, You, Me, Empathy is wonderful. I get so much out of it. Or like, you're doing such a great job. You know, all these things that I feel like I should take. So one of the questions that came out of that thought experiment was like, what would it look like if I accepted that praise? What would it look like if I really took that on as truth, right? Because it's not fair of me, or, you know, it's maybe very limited minded of me to not believe people, right? We need to believe people. So if people are saying, hey, you're doing a great job, Known, I really get a lot out of this, or whatever. And this is not me sort of tooting my own horn. I can't even speak. See, I'll get to that in a second in regards to can't speaking. But the point is, I need to take that on just like you need to take that on, because you're wonderful and you're great. And you're listening to this podcast because you want to maybe feel a little less alone, or you want to maybe find a little guidance, or just, you know, get a little empathy, find a little healing, whatever, you know, just be less alone in the world. And you are not alone. You know, you have this podcast, you have me, you have these guests pouring out their hearts. So take that on, because you deserve it. And I deserve it, for goodness sake. In regards to not speaking well, as I just did, as I showed you very clearly, and Jessica is laughing in the corner over here. I've been having some weird like brain fog lately, and also mixing up words and trouble finding words and kind of slurring at times, which has been very disconcerting. I saw a neurologist just earlier this week, and am going to do a neuropsychological test, which sounds daunting, because it is going to be daunting probably. I don't do well in tests. My mind goes back to school, and panic sets in, and sweat, and I never did well in tests in school. So hopefully they're mindful of that, my specific anxiety around test taking. But I just want to get to the bottom of it, because anytime something makes you feel like you're not yourself, it's disorienting, and I don't like it. So I'm going to explore it. I want answers. Answers are important. So that's where I'm at with that. I wanted to remind you to please, if you haven't left a review for You, Me, Empathy in Apple Podcasts, please do that. It is a free way to support me and the work that I'm doing. I would really appreciate it if you enjoy this show. Please leave a review. It takes a couple of minutes. Other ways to support the show, you can just go to feelyhuman.co/support. That's feelyhuman.co/support. There's financial ways, there's non-financial ways to support me and this podcast and the work I'm doing with Feely Human. And hey, if you haven't signed up for my free empathy workshop called Feely Human 101, do that. It's great. I love it, and I hope you love it too. Thank you for being here. What else did I want to say? I think that's probably it. I hope you're staying safe. Remember that right now is a time of collective grief in a lot of ways. It's a time of collective anxiety and frustration and trauma. And just know that you're not alone and that you have safe spaces like this one to feel a little less alone and feel a little bit more supported. And remember to keep leading with your heart. Keep exercising that empathy muscle. It takes practice. Keep exercising that anti-racism muscle. It takes practice. All of it. And some days you're going to struggle, and that's okay. All right? It's not about crushing every day. It's not about crushing, period. Let's just remove that phrase from our lexicon, period. Okay? No crushing, just living. Just being a feely human, leading with your heart, doing your gosh darndest, and showing up for others. And speaking of showing up for others, let's get into this episode 141 on showing up for others in grief with Alica Forneret.
La la la, you, me, empathy, yeah, la la la.
Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, the official podcast of the Feely Human Collective. On this show, we explore the struggles, the triumphs, the brights and the darks we face as humans trying to get by on this wondrous and overwhelming pale blue dot. The intent of You, Me, Empathy is to talk openly, without judgment, about our mental health, our neuroses, our shared anxieties and worries, to create a dialogue that is vulnerable and deeply human and empathetic, and to share that dialogue with others to inspire emotional and cognitive collaboration and insight so we can, hand in hand, break down the stigma that make us feel shame and guilt for struggling, for feeling our feelings, for being feely humans. You, Me, Empathy is a safe, friendly space designed to inspire the beauty in each of us. Today, I'm here with a fellow safe space creator, writer, and grief explorer and guide, Alica Forneret. Hello, Alica.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy to have you, and thank you for helping me pronounce your name correctly. There was a moment of pause there because I almost lost it in my noggin, but I pulled it back.
You did great.
Thank you. I really needed that validation. Thank you. Well, I'm so happy to have you here. I love what you're doing in the world of grief and processing grief, and certainly grief is a present topic right now because we're recording in the time of certainly a pandemic. That's one aspect of things, and there's many other things that we're all sort of grieving, and so I'm just grateful you're here. Grateful for you to kind of lend a voice to this show.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and I feel very privileged to be doing the work that I'm doing.
Awesome. Well, before we get into your story, Elisa, we always kick off the show with an emotional check-in. How are you feeling? How's your week been?
Yeah, in exercising some vulnerability, I definitely have had a challenging week, a challenging couple of weeks. So my energy has been kind of on a roller coaster lately. Today, I feel okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for asking.
What is helping with the, maybe you're on the sort of flat part of the roller coaster. What is helping with that?
Um, Acknowledging it and accepting it and letting myself be on that flat part of the roller coaster for a little bit. I think sometimes, a couple of weeks ago, I was having a really, really challenging time. And I was like, I got to get out of this. I got to get out of this. This feels so terrible. And now I'm just like, I'm just going to ride it. I'm just going to let myself be here. It's what my body needs. It's what my brain needs. So acknowledging it and just letting myself sit with it is helping.
So good to hear that. I find that is a beautiful and crucial lesson in kind of all human experience, is this moment where we allow ourselves to just be and sit and have patience with whatever's going on, because feelings are sometimes scary, and feelings sometimes lead us astray, or they're not, maybe they're not the truth sayers that we want them to be. But there is so much wisdom and healing, I think, as you're pointing out, in just being, just sitting there and allowing them to be. Because you doing that today, it may feel a little bit different maybe tomorrow. Maybe you'll have some answers.
Yeah. I think, sitting with it also just means that I can allow myself to not have to feel 100% on and happy and great and performing all the time. And that's really, like, no one long term, I don't think, can perform at 100% go, go, go. So we all need rest. We all need space. And I think that, like you said, that space allows us to wake up tomorrow, hopefully with having had some space really to reflect and think about why I'm here and acknowledge why I'm here and be okay with why I'm here. So, yeah.
I love that. So this is this feeling of like, I so relate to this feeling of like recognizing that we don't need to be 100%. We don't need to be on all the time. We don't need to like have that switch turned on all the time to, I don't know, put whatever we need to put out into the world, because that's what we feel like the world demands of us. And it's such a great self-care action that you're taking, and recognizing that. I think that's a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Yeah. It takes some practice, but it does wonders. So, yeah.
Yeah. How has that practice helped you in your grief, in your personal grief?
I think that I probably learned that practice because of my grieving process. I've hit some walls in the last couple of years, and I have found myself trying to perform and push through. And grief is really one of the first things, in my life where I've said, it is not worth pushing through at the expense of caring for myself. And it is not worth pushing through at the expense of not addressing my grief, which is incredibly important to me. And I think that, my personal grieving experience has definitely taught me that it's really okay and very important and critical to pause sometimes.
Yeah. I want to point out that term pushing through. I think that's such an important takeaway here. Because I would say that like, would you say that like, I mean, maybe in my own personal life, I feel like the pushing through often gets me into trouble because it's often, maybe fueled by some of the stuff we're talking about, like external validation or external, like, this is what I'm supposed to be to these people, or a maybe intentional or not so intentional hiding of like feelings or wanting to compartmentalize when I shouldn't push through and I need to just be, as we said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's like, for me, it's just truly unhealthy, like physically, mentally. I just know that it is so detrimental personally to ignore my limits and my boundaries, that I just gotta accept them where they are and where they lie in these moments and say they're here for a reason,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's well said. So you've been open about being in the, as you put it, Dead Moms Club, which I'm not in the Dead Moms Club. But I love that. I think that's such a beautiful ownership of loss and recognizing that. And I think it's a powerful thing to do, especially when you're in the space of helping others through grief. I'm wondering, can you walk me through your sort of mental health space, your life prior to losing your mom? Do you have memories there that you want to share?
Yeah, like in terms of my commitment to my mental health or practices that I had.
Yeah. So I guess I wasn't very clear. What I want to understand is, we as humans, as you so wonderfully write about and teach about and help others through, is like, we learn through suffering. There's a lot of learning through suffering, and obviously death is one of them. Grief is a process of learning and can be a process of introspection and just self-knowing and self-actualization and all that stuff. I'm wondering, prior to that experience, prior to this loss, this deep traumatic loss that you experienced with the loss of your mother, mental health wise, where were you at? And then how did that sort of change in those sort of initial experiences in losing your mom?
Yeah. I mean, so for me, in my younger years, had experience going to mental health professionals for support, advice, emergency services, et cetera. And I think that in terms of like formal therapy, that felt very normal and natural to me because of some, mental health issues that I had, questions that I had, things that I was going through physically and mentally that I sought support for. And I think at the same time, I was not really in like using any services or anything when my mom died. I was thinking a lot about death in general, and probably for the year that I was doing that death focused work before she died, probably should have been going to some therapy and dealing with my mental health, being just in really like entrenched in such a deeply like triggering and also just intimate and wildly new space for me. But yeah, I was exploring that, but wasn't necessarily tending to myself. And when she died, I think that the importance of a third party and an outlet to help me process what was going on in my mind became really important. I think for me before, it was very reactionary when I was seeking mental health support. And I think I was aware of how anything in life can impact our mental health and our emotional well-being. But seeking services for me really was quite reactionary versus just like general upkeep and having someone that's like sort of proactive and not reactive, or helping on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis, versus sort of, blips when things were feeling particularly hard.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think we do that when it comes to our mental health. It's and obviously there are tremendous hurdles for many people who, like I'm certainly in a privileged place where I can go to semi-regular therapy once a month or something like that. Not a lot of people can, right? And I think that's important to call out. But I do think we have this tendency to look at specifically mental health as this thing like we either don't look at it, or when we do, it's like, oh, if we're in crisis, then we'll check it out. Then we'll like go to therapy, or then we'll like address this thing. But until then, let's not focus on it so much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And how old were you when you lost your mother?
I was 27.
Tell me a little bit about your relationship with your mom.
It was complicated. It was, I had a lot of ups and downs and periods of really comfortable, beautiful relationship with her, and other periods where it was incredibly strained. I think that a lot of, especially after she died, I'm realizing and recognizing and trying to honor the fact that a lot of my creativity came from my mom. A lot of my passion was inspired by her. She was an artist and a nurse, and I think really modeled appreciating creative endeavors alongside, like, I guess sort of traditional career paths. And I'm really grateful for that. And yeah, at the same time, like we had some challenges.
Yeah. As I think all kids do, right? It's, I'm not a parent myself, but I like in my own, just to be open, like, in my own sort of mental health journey, there has been times where I've needed to kind of apply compassion toward my parents who weren't great parents, and there was, abuses and violence and things like that, and I'd imagine obviously losing one of them, that sort of perspective seeking is just thrown into hyperdrive, because we want to make sense of it. We want to be fair, and it's also like you don't want to, what's the saying? You don't want to like, once someone's gone, you don't want to talk bad about them. Right. Like, and what's the point of that even, right? So it's like this perspective changing, perspective seeking for our own sort of grace and peace in such a big loss.
Yeah, I was just having this conversation with someone yesterday about how to deal with anger and grief towards someone that you've lost. And personally, like, I would never speak ill of my mom for no reason, but there are things that my mom did that had a hugely negative and detrimental impact on my life. And I think that there's a line and maybe a balance of not wanting to speak negatively about people who you've lost, because what's the point? And to me, the flip side of it is the point is to heal, and the point is to take guilt off of myself, and the point is to work through issues that were a reality at one point and that will have very long-term effects for me as I continue to live the rest of my life. And I think that, I feel the same way about being really angry with my mom, as I do about being really joyful when I think of my mom, as I do when I think about being able to laugh at my mom, and not like funny memories of her, but like laugh at her and things that she did that seem absolutely absurd, and to be able to make jokes. I think that our relationship when people are alive are complex, and that doesn't mean that they're not going to be complex after they die.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that insight. That's really tremendous, because you're right. It's like when and I guess we do this a lot as people, now that I think about it, when people die, it's like this, we're idolizing them, and all of a sudden there are these heroes, and I get that emotionally. I understand that, but the other side of it, the flip side, like you said, there may be some denying of our own real, valid emotional experiences, which we do need to look at in order to heal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if I ignore the painful things that I experienced with my mom when she was alive, then I am not honoring myself and my own life and my own emotions and my own experience. And I'm not looking at her as the full person that she was. Both positive and beautiful and amazing pieces of her, alongside the ones that were also challenging. And I think the thing that's hard about it for me is not, oh, should I be angry? Can I be angry? Am I allowed to be angry? What's really frustrating for me is that I don't have time with her now to examine why those things happened the way that they did, or why she acted, or why I responded, or why something was going on in her life that led to things turning out the way that they did between us. That's what frustrates me. I'm like, I can be angry, but I'm like, oh, but why did that happen in the first place? I don't get the context.
Right.
I didn't have a relationship with my mom where, like, we stay up every night talking about her childhood and all of the trauma that she would have experienced that led to certain things happening between us as in a mother-daughter relationship. And I think that that's what's more, like I said, frustrating and complex for me.
Yeah. It's fucked up, and it's so sad. And I should have said this at the top. I'm deeply sorry for your loss. Like, no one should have to lose a parent.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm a weirdo in a lot of ways. And I think one of the ways I am maybe a weirdo is I have this sometimes fatalistic, kind of chaotic lens of the universe. And I think sometimes that's just my own sort of insecurity around control and things like that. But when I hear about your story and people losing parents, it's deeply angerifying. And obviously you, as someone who is the daughter of this loss, like, just by tenfold, it's unfair, and it's shitty, and I'm sorry.
Thank you.
So do you have a father in the picture?
Yep.
How has that been? How has, and I do want to go over, like, explore a little bit of, like, the early days of dealing with that loss, but how has your relationship with your father have changed, or how has it impacted that relationship?
Yeah, it's we've had a lot of experiences that we just never would have had, honestly, had my mom been around. Since she died, like, we've, for different grief related things that I've done, we've traveled, like, we've taken our first, like, trip alone together to New York City. And I've actually moved back in with him right now because of a bunch of stuff going on in my life with visas and stuff, but I'm living with him right now. And, I love my dad so much and I'm so grateful for the support. And I think that in a lot of ways, like, he's gotten to see a new side of me and my work and my career since my mom died. And I got into this space. So it's been interesting, and also just like navigating alongside each other. Losing my mom, I'm back in the house where I grew up with all of her stuff and my dad, which is bizarre and complicated, but I'm really grateful for him inviting me back into our home. And I think, it's been a wild ride.
Yeah. And do you have a sense of like how your work and your own sort of, grief guiding and sort of the website you created and all this wonderful support you provide others, how that has maybe impacted your father or helped your father through his own grief?
I know that it's helped us have bigger conversations. Like, he's attended my events, like Mother's Day weekend. He was like popping in and out of everything that I hosted over Mother's Day weekend.
Wow.
I think that it's made it possible for us to talk about my mom a little more. And I think it's also made it possible for us to open up about the things that are challenging, like he's dating right now and like that. I think if we were avoiding grief and my mom and all of that, it'd be really hard to navigate those things together. And, I know when I launched the website a little while after I'd been writing for a while, he called me one night and he's like, I just found your blog and I read everything in one sitting. And I was like,
oh my God.
And it was really cute and it was really sweet. And I think that my dad is a very, very thoughtful, very like kind person that's willing to talk about things that are intimate. And so I think that me putting myself out there has allowed us to sort of look inward and apply that to our relationship.
That's so beautiful. I got a little teary-eyed there for a second. Thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful. I'm so happy to hear that. So, Alica, will you talk a little bit about, those first sort of initial experiences, what was going on in your noggin and your mental health, shortly after losing your mother?
Yeah. So for context, I was in the middle of moving from the United States over to Scotland when my mom died. So the weekend of my sister's wedding, my mom fell and went into the hospital. She got out, and like on a Sunday, I think she got out, and then I moved to Scotland on a Tuesday. And so I was out of the country. And the following weekend, my dad called me and he said, like, your mom, she's back in the hospital, in the ICU, on a ventilator. And he always told me, because I travel and move a lot. I've moved all over since leaving home years ago. And he always said, like, your mom gets sick often when it's serious, when you need to come home, when we're in a point where it's like, you need to come because we're at the point where you need to say goodbye. I will let you know. Until then, like, keep traveling, living your life, etc. And it was that weekend after I'd moved to Scotland when he called and he said, like, this is the time that you need to come home. This is that moment. So I flew back that weekend and she died the next week. And so those first couple of days were quite challenging. My sister came down and the three of us were here when she died. And it was really bizarre because, at that point, I guess it would have been, by the time we had our funeral the following weekend, like 2 weeks earlier, my sister had gotten married and our entire family was in town for her wedding. And now they were all coming back for my mom's funeral.
Wow.
And it was pretty challenging because my sister had also been on her honeymoon and all of that. Like it was just people, and my mom's from Canada. So her family had already gone back to Canada. And yeah, it was a whirlwind getting people back and seeing who could afford to come back and figure out who had time to come back. So the first couple of days were really hard, and I was pretty much in like planning mode. I knew that it was hard. I knew I was sad. I had the moments where I was like, this is so wild and surreal. Like, how could this happen? And at the same time, like, there were no plans for her funeral. So I sort of took over working with my family to plan her entire funeral, and was sort of in like planning execution mode.
Yeah. Do you find that is a common thing? Because I've heard that a few times, like the loss, and then obviously like the logistics of like not having a plan, but like pouring yourself into planning seems like an initial sort of makes sense sort of coping mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, for me and what other people I have said that I've heard is it gives you a sense of control. Like you've just bought something, you had no control over it.
Yeah.
You have no control over the future. You feel like your whole world's flipped upside down. What I can control is like what number of chairs we're going to get for the backyard for her memorial, and that they show up on time, and what food we're going to eat, and how many people are going to come, and how to get invitations out. Like you instantly can regain at least some sort of sense of control, because for me in the days after where I didn't have anything to do because I'd been moving, like I didn't have a job. I didn't have anything to plan. I was like sitting around watching Gilmore Girls and drinking whiskey once the funeral was over. And I think that in those immediate days after, like it really did give me an opportunity to take some control back, and then also to do something useful. I think that's the other thing, is that when someone dies, it can feel like so many things are pointless and so many things that you had planned are out the window. And, you know, yeah, sitting on the couch and watching TV and drinking whiskey felt useful for me in that moment because I needed a break to some extent. But before that, like I really just needed to feel like I was doing something that mattered.
Yeah. I mean, it makes so much sense. And drinking whiskey and watching Gilmore Girls that seems like just a wise decision, like across the board.
Yeah. Felt great in the moment.
Yeah. I love it. Well, so what happens next? You start planning for the funeral. The funeral happens. Like, what's going on next? At what point do you start kind of like, okay, I need to like process this. I need to like figure out what my life is.
I mean, I was processing it the whole time. I wrote a eulogy. We had a lot of people show up. It meant a lot of conversations with people that I don't spend a ton of time with. So it was like we were cramming all the memories and all the reflecting and all the thinking and processing into a lot of those initial interactions that I had with people. And then I think a lot of it came, you know, I stayed with my dad for a while. And then eventually I was just like, I had a reason to get back to Scotland, and we just decided I was going to go. And I think that when I got back to Scotland, it was a pretty bizarre situation. My husband, at the time, he was my boyfriend, but he's from Australia, and we moved to Scotland together. And his mom was actually coming to visit in Scotland. And so the reason that I left my dad to go back was to meet my partner's mom, which was so weird because it was
for the first time.
Yeah, for the first time.
Wow.
And it was just so bizarre. but so beautiful, because what ended up happening was like, I didn't have a job. She was there on vacation, and my husband, he was working. So we spent a lot of time alone together.
Wow.
Just like weeks after my mom had died. And yeah, it was pretty wild. And I think that was the moment where, you know, being in that situation, I processed with her.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's such a beautiful mirroring that occurs. I'm so glad you had her in that moment in those couple of weeks. That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, it was special.
Are you like, you know, prior to this experience, this loss, were you the type of person who could easily be vulnerable and talk about hard things?
I think I was the type of person who could talk about taboo things. I don't necessarily think that I was being vulnerable with personal parts of myself, though.
I see. Yeah.
That makes sense. Like I mentioned, but the year before my mom died, I was working on a project specifically focused on death, in the abstract though. So we were looking at death in different cultures, and death, how it's reflected in food and community and writing and music. So like I was all about getting into the weird stuff. But never, you know, in that project did I specifically reflect on my own grief. And then about a month before we went to print on that project, after working on it for a year, that's when my mom died. It really forced me, I think, to pivot, because I was like, I need to do some work myself now.
Yeah.
I need to look inward. And so we dedicated the project to my mom, and writing, you know, the editor's note in that project was one of the first spaces where I was really not just talking about something taboo, but talking about my relationship, and being vulnerable with that taboo topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, I certainly relate to a lot of the writing as processing feelings thing. You know, it's such a wonderful tool for that. At one point, like, how many years were you writing before you started the website?
How many years was I writing in general, or writing about grief?
Writing about grief.
Oh, I mean, I started that almost immediately. I'm trying to think, because she died October 2016. I moved and started producing products in 2017. So Dead Moms Club products in 2017. And I had been writing. So like not long after.
Yeah. And when did the site start?
That would have been early 2017.
Okay. And so walk me through the site and like what your intention is with it, and what obviously the impetus, I get that, but like what is your goal with it, like, ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is for me to have a space to write.
It has to be, right?
Yeah, of course. I think also for me, when my mom died, it was like, and I say this all the time, most of the resources that I were finding were like the doves and the rainbows and the recovery and the you'll be better one day and everything will be fine, and there's stages, and
just like, point your feet in the direction of happiness.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, no, I want to be angry. I want to be jealous. I want to be confused. I want people to curse. Like, I want to read stuff that feels raw and human. And I wasn't finding a voice that like reflected how I was talking about my loss and really working through grief and loss in a way that resonated with me. So I created it. And I think really from there, it turned into an opportunity to reflect and muse and and also take the learnings that I was having from my experience navigating grief, and also the experience that I was having at that point, like later, interacting with like a lot of grief professionals and people that were in the space and building relationships and networking about end of life. And I was like, oh, everyone should know about this. Everyone should talk about this. Everyone should like be aware of the fact that there's different ways to do this and people out here doing this work. So the goal really for me as I continue to develop it is, to have that space for me, but also to create a space where people can have like a different perspective, useful tools, different kinds of resources. And that's why I put together the site and then the newsletters.
I love it. Where does empathy in your mind play a role in grief?
I think when I think about it, it takes me to the Dead Moms Club. I think what's really interesting about being around people and interacting with people and hearing stories from people who've experienced a similar loss is that they meet you sort of a couple steps ahead of where anyone else can meet you. And they can put themselves in your shoes because they've experienced what you have. And even if the loss is different technically, because it's a different person or you're a different race or you have different backgrounds, like all of our relationships and our losses are different. But there's this place where people can meet you where it's like, they're not going to give you those like sad, pitying looks. They're not going to ask you the questions that nobody should be asking right after someone dies because they've had those questions uncomfortably asked of themselves. And that's where I think that like empathy and being able to exercise empathy with people in grief is incredibly important if you can do it without having experienced that same loss yourself. And there's like, in my mind, I'm hoping that there are ways that people can learn how to and acknowledge that it's important to show up for people, even when you haven't experienced that loss, by like learning how to interact with them in a way that shows that you care and that you're actively listening. Yeah. No, I hear you. So I launched a little like business that hopefully will be a big business someday, called Feely Human, just back in May. And I launched it with this free empathy workshop. And the way I think about empathy is it's a practice, right? It's a skill, and it's not but however, I say that it's practice and skill, but we sometimes as humans like to look at it as, we grab it and then it's in our tool chest, but it's something that needs to be honed for the reasons you're talking about, right? Because there's so much nuance in empathy, and practice and skill. And it takes, like, I like to think of it as this tool that, like, even though I haven't experienced the loss of a mother and certainly can't fully understand that loss, I still know loss. I've experienced death in my life. I've experienced some of those feelings, right? And holding on to some of that, I think, is an important part of that connection piece when it comes to creating these communities, right? Is allowing others to be, and maybe I can't jump ahead, like you said, but I can still create that safe space of some understanding that allows them to grieve in the way that they need to grieve. Yeah. And I think too, in hearing what you're saying, like what I'm also hearing and a huge advocate of is like knowing and learning really, or honing the capacity to show up for people, but knowing that you're going to have to show up for every person differently. And that just because like you can interact with me having experienced my loss and show up in a way that's incredible for me, where we can like, whatever, make jokes and laugh and like, I can be vulnerable and cry, but then also show up for other people that aren't experiencing their grief the same way I am, and support them adequately, but differently. And knowing that you can have the capacity to show up for everyone, but in different ways, I think is very key.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's essential. I mean, it's recognizing that we are all, we have different needs, we have different wants, we have different hearts and minds, and yeah, that's crucial. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about grief and this goddamn pandemic that we're experiencing, this grief. I mean, I feel this collective grieving that's happening now. Like I'm a deeply sensitive person, and I feel it deeply as this collective sort of grief that's stirring in our hearts. Can you talk to me a little bit about that for you personally, and like how you have maybe in your community have talked about it for others?
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Like, there is a very deep sense of grief that so many people are feeling right now due to the pandemic. And it's not just grief as it relates to death, but it is grief as it relates to the loss of normalcy, the loss of jobs, the loss of family and friend contact. It's the loss of interaction. It's the loss of work, like being able to go into work. Like, we have lost so much in such a short amount of time that has completely reframed the way that we have to get up in the morning, move through the world, and interact with people. And, one of the things that I think about and talk about a lot in grief is this concept of having to recalibrate after someone dies. So, for example, someone dies, you sleep in bed next to them every single night. And every morning before they died, you'd roll over and you'd put your arm around them and you'd cuddle them, and then you'd get up. And there's this period of time, right, where even after they die, every morning you're going to still keep rolling over. You still keep rolling over, and they're not there, and they're not there. And your body and your brain and just all of your habits have to recalibrate to a world without that person in it from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. And it is exhausting. And it's moments where, like, for me, I think, oh shit, I was like in the newspaper. Who wants to hear about this? My mom. And I go to pick up the phone, and it's been years. And I realized in that moment that my hand reaching for her was totally normal, and my brain wanting to call her was totally normal. But I have to recalibrate and realize she wants to be on the other end. And I think in terms of the pandemic, we are experiencing that in almost every part of our life. Normally I would wake up and I would have a routine before. Not, for me, like, I work from home, but in other people's cases, like, where you get up and you have your routine and you get ready and you do your thing, and then you physically leave your home to go somewhere else to do your job. That's out the window. We are grieving the experience of that routine. At the same time, like, we're grieving the experience of being able to call someone and have a physical face-to-face interaction with them. Out the window, not an option. So I think that on so many layers, all of that is compounding. Plus, we are watching people die every day, and it is in the news, and it is front of mind, and it is part of almost every. Obviously, it's impossible to go a day without talking about coronavirus right now. And on the flip side of that, like, you are talking about death in the background of every conversation, death and illness and loss. So, I mean, it is at the heart of all of our experiences in this moment.
Yeah. No, that's so well said. I just yesterday I found out a very dear friend's kid, and our neighbors who we've been sort of quarantining with, their kid tested positive, which is scary. And so I went out yesterday and got a test for the first time, and I should know in maybe 3 days if I have it or not. But I was thinking, like, next week I plan on going backpacking up in Northern California, and I was so much looking forward to it. Months planning. And I tell my wife, Jessica, I say, this may not happen. And she's like, yeah, planning in the time of pandemic is just not a thing. We just really can't do it, because it's like we're setting ourselves up for a grieving process in that already sort of huge collective grieving process that we're all experiencing that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's weird.
It's so weird.
How are you, Elisa? How are you grounding yourself during this time? How are, like, we're talking about this momentous time where we're experiencing all of these losses because of all of these changes, because we're recalibrating everything. How are you personally finding yourself, grounding yourself, finding that center?
To be honest, I'm struggling right now.
Yeah.
I am trying to do a lot of the things that normally in other circumstances would help me. But it's some days it really just isn't enough, or it isn't the right thing. I am in a position right now. I moved internationally. I'm away from my husband at this moment. I'm living back with my dad. I'm in a different bed every night. My job, normally I'd work from home, and I'm working in a totally new space. Everything has changed for me, and being grounded feels almost impossible right now. So really what I'm doing is I'm trying to do the things that normally would work, and I'm letting them not work sometimes and just being okay with that. Like I really unfortunately don't have an answer because things are really tough for me right now.
Yeah. No, it's okay. You don't have to have an answer.
Yeah, but it's good to think about the fact that, like, I'm trying stuff, I'm normally working out. I do like strength training that feels probably the closest to being grounded, where I am finding control over my body and strength in my body, and just being in my body and aware of my body in those hours that I'm doing it every week. And that's probably the closest that I'm feeling to settled in place in those moments.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel you. I feel you on that. I am someone who holds a ton of my emotion and feelings and struggle in my body, in my physical body. I hold it in my stomach, or my chest, I start having, chest pains or something. I know anxiety is happening. If my stomach hurts, I know that, like, maybe my depression is getting bad and I need to move, or I need to feel strong in my body. Yeah, those are huge, huge steps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I know you have a heart out at the top of the hour. So let's start wrapping it up. I want to honor your time, of course.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We do always wrap up the show talking about empathy heroes, Elisa. So someone in our lives who is deeply empathetic. It could be someone we know. It could be even a character from a story we love. I will share my empathy hero first, just to give you a moment to think about yours. My empathy hero this week is my friend Yishun Lai. Yishun is a writer and an editor, and she just published a little essay series called Pinups through Homebound Publications, and I just finished it this week, and it's about her relationship. It deals with race, and it deals with being a woman in the sort of outdoors, and her sort of love of the outdoors, and her love of sport, outdoor sports specifically. And it's just such a beautiful encapsulation of, like, what it means to really kind of love the outdoors. And I am someone who loves the outdoors, so it's a book that made me want to wander a bit more. And I do hope I'm negative on that COVID test, so I can go wandering very soon into the wild pale blue dot. So Yishun Lai, my dear friend and writer, her new book's Pinups, and she's my empathy hero this week.
Lovely.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, for me, it'd also be a very close friend. His name's Elias. He is a huge champion for me, and also just the person who always shows up to actively listen, and actively listen in the moments when I need to work through something. And he is a person that models, I think, both just being there and also actively being there, which is really huge for me, not just being like the shoulder to lean on, but the shoulder that you like lean on and that props you up and helps you work through it so that you can get back up again at the end of the day. He's pretty incredible, and I'm very grateful to have him in my life in the harder moments and even in the good moments where he recognizes when I really do just need to celebrate and celebrate in a really positive, beautiful way.
I love that. He sounds, Elias is his name?
Elias, yeah.
Yeah. We need friends like that in our lives.
Again,
I
yeah.
love that. Well, Elisa, where can the Feely humans out there learn more about the work you're doing, connect with you, all of that lovely stuff?
Yep. So my website is www.alicaforneret.com. And Instagram is at elisa.forneret. On Facebook, I am Grief is Hard AF. And if you find me in any of those places, it is well connected to all of the other things that I'm doing and places that you can get in touch with me.
Amazing. Well, Elisa, thank you so much for being a part of this podcast, You Me Empathy. I really appreciate the work you're doing in the world, and I was grateful to connect.
Thank you. I appreciate the space to speak with you and show up today.
Absolutely. And to you listeners, as I always say, I'm here, you're here, we're here together on this wayward, overwhelming, awe-inspiring, pale blue dot. We have each other. It's You, Me, Empathy.